Hey, it's Chris Fleming. Welcome back to another edition of Spirit Talk. This month, our guest is a writer, speaker, and a publisher with a lifelong interest in man searching for meaning. He's the PEN Award-winning author of Occult America and One Simple Idea, How the Lessons of Positive Thinking Can Transform Your Life. Now, he's written on everything from the War on Witches to the Secret Life of Ronald Reagan for the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Salon, and Time. Now, the Washington Post says he treats esoteric ideas and movements with an even-handed intellectual studiousness that is too often lost in today's raised voice discussions. Now, he's also the voice of popular audiobooks, including Alcoholics Anonymous and the Jefferson Bible. And he's the host of the web series Origins, Superstitions. In addition, he's the vice president and executive editor at Tarcher Perigee, a division of Penguin Random House. Please welcome to our show, Mitch Horowitz. Hi, Mitch.
Hey, Chris. Good to be here.
You know, I came across your book, Occult America, and, you know, I think it was last year I tried to have a guest on. We wanted to get into some of the things that were going on in the occult, and the guest avoided all that, yet he used to write about it many years ago.
Oh, is that right?
And every single question he eluded. And I was just like, what the heck is going on? You know, and when we take a look at, you know, the presidency that's coming up here in the election and how ridiculous it is, how horrific it is that we have come to this level that it's become entertainment, and it's pathetic.
Yeah. It's hard to imagine Dwight Eisenhower and Adlai Stevenson running today, isn't it? You know?
Oh, my God. You know, I mean, JFK, spoke about this crap a long time ago in one of his speeches.
He really did. He really did. I had the privilege to be friendly with Dwight Eisenhower's son, John Eisenhower, who was a historian, and I had the privilege of publishing him. And John read my book, Occult America, liked it very much. And it was just extraordinary, the level of dignity and learnedness and mild manner that came from him, and he sounded and looked just like his father. And he died several years ago, but he could barely recognize the politics in our world as we practice them today.
Yeah, and you know, people forget that, you know, these individuals represent the United States of America, billions of people. You know, and not only that is our relationship with other countries and how they are going to view us.
Right. You know, Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote, the unmistakable mark of progress in an individual is the tone that he takes. So the tone that we're taking to the rest of the world is something that we really ought to be concerned about. And, of course, it's not only our candidates. It's what we do all day long on social media, the sarcasm, the cynicism, the coarseness that's on Facebook and Twitter and so forth. The tone that we are taking as a society, not just the most notable figures, but every individual, is often shameful, and it's something that should give each of us as individuals and as a nation some time out for soul searching.
Yeah, you know, you're right. I mean, where's the morals? Where is the leaders that we used to have in this great country? You know, these presidents have slowly been diluted over the years. I mean, Obama's done some wonderful things and then not so wonderful things, but then we have to look at what was set up many years ago, you know, by some of these presidents that is affecting us today.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's interesting. I mean, you take a look at a figure like Obama and a figure like Ronald Reagan, different figures politically, but both people in public comported themselves with a tone of dignity. They didn't humiliate other people. They didn't name call. As much as Reagan and Obama may differ politically, their personalities, their public personas, their comportment, their style of speech is actually very similar. And if we're losing that at the national level, we're losing it because it's a reflection of who we are. I mean, again, if you take a look at the rhetoric online, so much of it is sarcastic, is silly, is frivolous. You know, our leaders are a reflection of us, and I think our nation needs to consider that.
Well, we need to wake up, you know. In your book, Occult America, you've written that Ronald Reagan was deeper into the esoteric than we've realized. How is that so?
He was really something. Most people know that Reagan and his wife, Nancy, had some interest in astrology, and that's been in the newspapers. But one of the things I found that absolutely fascinated me, and I've written about this for the Washington Post, Salon, other places, is that there are lines in Reagan's speeches and writings that he did himself from the very beginning of his political career right up through the first term of his presidency, in which he quotes an occult scholar named Manly P. Hall, who wrote a book called The Secret Teachings of All Ages. Both Hall and Reagan were contemporaries of one another. They both lived in California. And I was reading an essay that Reagan wrote for Parade magazine on the 4th of July in 1981. He was asked to write a little essay on what the 4th of July personally meant to him. He hand wrote an essay on a yellow legal pad, gave it to Parade magazine, and I'm saying to myself, this looks familiar. And I realized that there was actual phrasing and references in that essay that Reagan hand wrote that had come from the writings of Manly P. Hall, this occult scholar, who was not a well-known person at the time. And it's absolutely remarkable to realize that an American president was reading a figure like this. Hall is a person I venerate, but he would be widely misunderstood by the general public. Reagan also talked openly with reporters about his friendship with astrologers like Carol Reiter or reputed psychics like Jean Dixon. He bragged to a reporter about being an Aquarius, the most philosophical of all the signs, and so forth. And he would drop these references into conversations all the time. He and his wife Nancy talked about witnessing UFOs in the 1950s. Reagan had a similar experience when he was governor of California. He told a Wall Street Journal reporter about it in the 1970s. And if you look across Reagan's career from when he broke into acting up through his presidency, there's this consistent attention he pays to esoteric and mystical ideas. He was friends with, actually, in his biography, he named Carol Reiter, who was used to be considered the dean of American astrologers, as one of his closest friends. There's a woman named Eden Gray who's written some very popular guides to tarot. She was in movies with Reagan. Reagan identified her as a friend and talked to her about astrology. People have to understand that Reagan and his wife spent 30 years in Southern California. They were part of the social circles of their day. They were their friends, their neighbors were other Hollywood celebrities who also had New Age interests. This wasn't something they were ashamed of or embarrassed of or tried to hide. And in many regards, Reagan was marked for life by some of the New Age interests that he developed in California. And the thing I admire in him is that he at no point tried to hide this or shield this. He would talk openly about it. People could accept it or not. But it is a mark of how different our times are, in a sense that we don't think of Reagan as going back to ancient history. This was just the 1980s. But he was able to talk about these things without it becoming a national scandal. But unless we recognize these things in Reagan, we don't get a full measure of the man himself, because a lot of his speeches and such came out of the tradition of American positive mind metaphysics, and you can find the references right there. I've written about it. Throw his name and mine into Google, and you can track the articles. He really has to be understood as somebody who was, in part, a product of American New Age culture.
When you look at Reagan, like you're describing, you talk about esoteric practices, and for those listening that don't really know, is it's information, specialized knowledge or interest that is understood by just a few group of people. Now, can that knowledge be supernatural? Can it be the occult? Can it be certain stuff they're able to access in other dimensions that nobody else is? What type of things have you come to realize that Reagan or other presidents may have been involved that is pretty freaky?
Well, when I use the term occult, I don't use it in a sinister way.
Okay.
The occult, it's really a term that came out of the European Renaissance. Scholars and translators in the Renaissance were looking for a way to talk about the religion of the ancient world, the religion of ancient Greece, ancient Rome, ancient Egypt, and they used the Latin term occulta, which means secret or hidden, and that became our term occult. It really means basically the belief in a hidden dimension of life, and that the effects of this hidden dimension can be felt on us and through us. And the most benign form that this has taken is what we call the power of positive thinking, the belief that thoughts are causative, the belief that thoughts can make things happen. So Donald Trump, for example, cites his favorite book as that very one, The Power of Positive Thinking by the Reverend Norman Vincent Peale. And he said Peale was the guy who taught me to believe in myself. I don't think Donald Trump ever had any trouble believing in himself, but Peale helped him along, we'll say. And that's the form of metaphysics that's most popular among most Americans, and that I'm personally most interested in myself right now. Everybody believes that to some degree or another, our thoughts affect what happens to us. Now, some people might see that strictly on a psychological level, makes you a better person to be around, makes you a better carpooler, and other people see that on more of a spiritual or metaphysical level. They believe, look, we are made in the image of the Creator, and to some extent, our thoughts have some kind of actualizing abilities. That's the kind of thing you'll see in the book and movie The Secret, for example.
Right.
I'm very interested in that point of view because that's really the American spirituality, and you find some of that expressed in these vast prosperity ministries run by people like Joel Osteen and T.D. Jakes, and you find it expressed within New Age spiritual culture. So as vast as the differences among those two reaches of American religion are, they each come to that idea that our thoughts are causative. There's some sort of reciprocity out in the world with what we think. That was a belief of Ronald Reagan's. That was something that he talked about. So you find it's interesting. There's so much division in our country, but you find that people from very different walks of life, spiritually, politically, agree that yes, there's something to that. There's something there. That's really the American metaphysics. We call it the power of positive thinking.
Mitch, I'm glad you've touched on this, and I know that you wrote a book that's out now called One Simple Idea: How the Lessons of Positive Thinking Can Transform Your Life. And in just a second, I'd like you to touch on that book too, and we'll go back to the occult. But I want to share with you, because you said something interesting, Donald Trump, the book by Peale, Positive Thinking. My stepdad gave me that book, like maybe 25, 30 years ago.
Wow.
And said, here, read this. And I didn't read it, Mitch. I started looking at it, and I looked at it, and I was like, oh, give me a break. I was very stubborn. I'm a Taurus. I was kind of set in my ways. I had a lot of anger in me, and I didn't bother. But I have to share this with you because I think this goes along with what your focus is consciously. About 2 years ago, I said to the universe, and when I say universe, I'm talking about the Creator, I'm talking about angels, I'm talking about loved ones, I'm talking about particles, everything. And I said, what is this source? I'm tired of all these motivational speakers out there talking about law of attraction and this and that and saying it's this way. And everybody has a different version of it, which is wonderful. But it all came from somewhere. Where's the source? And ironically, the universe, as you know, will step in and guide you towards that answer in some shape or form. I mean, synchrodestiny, there's many different ways. All of a sudden, later that day, I'm on YouTube looking for something completely different. I come across this black and white video that pops up with Napoleon Hill. And I go, who is this guy? This guy looks like my grandfather. So I pop it, and he does. He looked like my grandfather, Eugene Farrell. And I pop on it, and I start listening to him. He starts talking about The Secret and everything. I'm like, oh, my God. So I did research on him, and, I've come to really trust the stuff he's written. And, we do know he's taken some of the stuff from other people in the early 1900s, late 1800s. But this is like the one guy that really made it mainstream.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
He's the source that made it mainstream.
Hill. Yeah. Hill's book, Think and Grow Rich, has been an influence on so many people since it came out in 1937. And some people are put off by the title because they think, Think and Grow Rich, it sounds sort of gauche, it sounds sort of silly or greedy or something like that. But I tell artists, students and teachers, if you're not reading Think and Grow Rich, you're selling yourself short, because it's the best book that I've ever encountered, hands down, for how to act on your ideas, for how to take an idea from being just a pipe dream to being something that you're actually going and doing out in the world. In fact, I'm writing a 10-book series right now on the ideas of Napoleon Hill. I'm going to be done with the first one in September, and it's about what might be considered Hill's key idea, which is that you really must have a definite chief aim in life. And so much of who you are and what you do and what your opportunities are will revolve around having one really deep, passionately felt aim. And a lot of people say they have an aim, but they say it in a kind of wishy-washy way, or they might have a whole range of other things that they want that may contradict what they say is their aim. And Hill's point was that it has to be definite, it has to be passionate, it has to be almost obsessive. Right. And we view the term obsessive in a negative way, but he put it out there, I think, with great honesty that, look, the truth is, whether you're looking at a general or an artist or a diplomat or an inventor or a financier, if you're looking at a successful individual, you're almost certainly going to find somebody who had one obsessive aim in his or her life. And once a person learns that lesson, it can be very powerful. That's sort of the cornerstone of Hill's work, although there are many, many other things that come after that. But that's sort of the entry point. And he's been a huge influence on me. And I think you're right on. I believe his book, Think and Grow Rich, is really the North Star, for all this motivational literature.
Yeah, and it's affected me tremendously as well, some of his other books. And while I'm not going to go into it totally here because I want to get back into your stuff, but your stuff does tend to discuss some of these things. I mean, Napoleon Hill in Think and Grow Rich talks about ESP. He talks about infinite knowledge, and then he talks about the council and these spirits and these intelligences, these beings that would come to him. And then later on in his life, he came to accept that, my God, there are these beings that you can communicate with, and you have to be careful because there's a lot of negative forces as well. But I think that right there goes along as when we talk to the occult, and we can break down the occult, beyond America, looking at the Nazis with Hitler trying to having certain groups that were trying to find certain information from a spiritual way to assist in the future and taking over other countries using propaganda such as Nostradamus and occult practices. But you look at Occult America, and there's all these conspiracies about, them going to a certain place and worshiping this giant owl and worshiping certain gods. These could be gods from the Nephilim. They could be gods from the Great Flood. They could be the spirits and souls of these beings that were on this planet at one time. But the fact remains is that, whether it's political or not, they believe and they know that there are certain spiritual energies, certain consciousness, certain beings in the visible realm that obviously have access to all full knowledge, past, present, and future, that they at certain times attempt to access and get information from to assist them in their life.
Well, when it comes to our country, I don't traffic with any of the conspiracy theories about Masonry or Illuminati or anything like that. I do believe that Freemasonry, for example, has been a very real and concrete influence on our nation, on our politics, but I think in a very positive way. It is a fact that a number of the founding fathers, including George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, John Hancock, were Freemasons. Absolutely true. But I think that if you look at their writings, what they derived from Freemasonry was a strengthened sense of the importance of religious liberty, the ability of people from different religious backgrounds to exist together within one organization, which is a tenet of Freemasonry, a belief that America as a new society was part of a chain of great civilizations that encouraged the search for meaning, and a belief in the protection of the individual search for meaning, which I think is the most sacred thing that this country does. So there is a real concrete influence of Freemasonry in American life, but I think it's been positive. I think it's been really authentic and positive. I think people today get carried away with conspiracy theories about Bohemian Grove and the Illuminati and so forth, because there's a feeling in our society today that there's not accountability within our institutions, governmental institutions, financial institutions, and that feeling is absolutely correct. We do need more transparency. We do need more accountability, but I would encourage people not to go off, looking towards conspiracy theories as a way of expressing that, because that almost becomes a kind of entertainment in a way, imagining that there's this star chamber somewhere where these bad guys are dressed in robes, whereas the truth is, the real bad guys are the ones who figure out that they can deny your health claim if, they leave you on hold for 20 minutes or something. I mean, there's a lot more evil in that, than there is, guys sitting around a pentagram-shaped table.
And it's one thing I want to touch on, because I want to get into your positive mind metaphysics here, is I listened to a lot of audio recordings of Seth. Seth was an entity, through Jane Roberts that she channeled back in the 70s. Right. And the one thing it says that is amazing is, you talk about staying positive, but even when you focus on negative, even in an entertaining way, such as investigating the conspiracy theories and negativity, or even horror movies and loving horror movies, is that like even today in the entertainment industry, there's so much on demons and so much on twisting what we once thought was innocent and precious and turning it into fear, panic, terror, evil, and demonic. And I'm sitting there going, my God, the mindset is becoming so negative that I know from studying psychology and research that's been done to plants and babies and animals that impacts us psychologically. Mm-hmm. So
I think
go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, I think you're absolutely correct. Although I would say that the greater danger that we face comes from not horror movies or horror fiction, Stephen King or what have you, but from how much of our entertainment is based in humiliating other people. Like so much of reality television, I mean, let's face it, is really just about, who's going to take the spill this week? Who's going to take the fall this week? Who's going to look like a fool? Who's going to get humiliated? Who's going to get shouted down? And that, of course, exists on most of our political talk shows as well. It's really just a question of who can outsmart who, call a name, shout, and kind of overcome or dominate another person. So, on one hand, you have entertainment that's based in zombies and horror movies, and I do think we OD on some of that stuff sometimes, although, I have to admit I'm a fan of that stuff myself.
Me too. Walking Dead,
right. It is possible to OD on it, but I'm a fan of that stuff myself. But I think a more pernicious influence comes from the so-called ordinary stuff, the Real Housewives shows or what have you, where it's really all based in seeing somebody get humiliated. It's like gathering around in a circle to watch a schoolyard fight, knowing that somebody's going to take the fall. Yeah. And gossip, of course. And this is stuff that we got to watch out for, because that stuff, I think, enters our psyches and becomes ordinary to us, and we take in like a huge diet of it. And I think that's a problem, and I think that's where that reflects a lot of problems in human nature, this love that we have for seeing other people get humiliated.
Well, yeah, I think as a culture, and especially generations, getting desensitized and things that were not acceptable are acceptable now, but where do we draw the line? I mean, you've written about positive mind metaphysics. Mm-hmm. Can you explain that, and who's your favorite person in that field?
Well, positive mind metaphysics it's really another way of referring to the power of positive thinking, and it's a belief that our thoughts play a part in shaping circumstances, that thoughts have some causative principle or property. I could describe that as a spiritual belief, a metaphysical belief. I do think we see certain things in the sciences that hint at the same thing. I think we're really almost on our knees looking through a keyhole, just realizing in the early 21st century the vast impact of the mind. I think for our I think that's the question of our whole generation, just how vast and formative are our thoughts, are our minds. So much to talk about there. The person who I like most individually in the positive thinking field is a writer named Neville Goddard. He wrote under the pen name Neville. He died in 1972, produced lots of books, lots of lectures. He had this radical argument which he could articulate in such a persuasive, elegant way. And Neville basically said, your imagination is God. The human imagination is God. And you are constantly, through your thoughts and emotions, outpicturing in the world around you everything and everyone that you come into contact with, and that all these things are rooted in you as you are ultimately rooted in the Creator, and that your mind itself is a kind of a vessel, a capillary of the Creator, of divine influence. And it's the most radical argument you could imagine, and it's the kind of thing that, on one hand you say, that's ridiculous, I can't possibly believe that, or it's sacrilegious or something. But when you read how carefully and simply Neville articulates it, it's just remarkable. And I come back to his work again and again. He was a really original voice. He's getting more popular, and I think he may become the voice that has the most posterity coming out of the positive thinking movement. Very radical, but just extraordinary. That's my individual favorite figure.
I love what you just said. I have never heard of this guy. I definitely want to do research on him. When you talk about what are you rooted in, and you take a look at your consciousness, your subconscious level, and then what we know is conscious energy exists after death. Mm-hmm. Being in the paranormal field myself, as well as understanding consciousness, is we know entities, spirits, they can have attachments. That attachment, which is the same thing when you take about rooted in, you look at energy that flows from, alternating current and other current, and flows from when you plug it into an outlet and it goes to a device and it makes it play. What is making you play?
Yeah.
But what also is being stored by your output? What are you outputting? That energy has to go somewhere.
Right.
If you're angry all the time, where do you think that anger is going? Well, I'm just releasing it. Where? It's in your home. It's in your car.
Right.
You're jumping back in and no different. What do you fill your pool up with? Water. Well, what do you fill your home up with? What do you fill your friends up with? What do you feel your environment? What are you outputting? You can't avoid that. It's around you.
Yeah. It's extraordinary. So many things that we take for granted are vastly more mysterious than they appear. It's just that we're so accustomed to them. Like you said, you plug a device into a wall outlet, and suddenly it starts making noise, or it starts moving, or something like that. Why is that? And the more you keep asking why, the more and more mysterious it becomes. Now, here's a case in point, and this is true even for technologies that we consider, practically primeval today. One of my kids was asking me, how does a vinyl record work? How does a vinyl album work? And so I know how one works, and I start explaining to him, well, you can take these, you take vibrations from sound waves and you replicate them on this petroleum product, and then you put a needle on it and it starts making the same noise. And I'm suddenly saying to myself, this is extraordinary. This is technology from the 1890s, and I can tell you the technical details, but I haven't the slightest idea how it works. Why should putting a needle, and a gramophone to a petroleum product repeat these so-called sound vibrations, and replicate them the same way that we hear them from the original source? It's unbelievable. And if I don't even understand, in fact, how an old Victrola record works, I can tell you the details, but the mechanism for that, how little do we understand, about these binary codes that make up our digital culture, or plugging the toaster into the wall, or what have you. We live in a world of mysterious energies. It's absolutely incredible.
Hear, hear. But people think when they look at Occult America and they hear the term occult, compared to metaphysics, tends to be more positive. Why do you think it is when they hear the term occult that they also start to jump to something sinister, something evil?
Yeah. Well, look, in the late ancient world, there was a big battle between the early church and the fading pagan powers for dominance. Obviously the church won. As is typical in human history, the victor gets to define the loser, and the early church fathers, who had a great deal to offer the world, ran down the pagan powers as involved in some sort of demonic activity or the worship of black forces, dark forces, and so forth, which was a way that the pagan world had never viewed itself. And during the Renaissance, when European scholars began to rediscover some of the philosophies of the ancient world, Greece, Rome, Egypt, they were fascinated with all this, and they felt it comported with Christianity. They didn't see themselves as studying anything dark. They called it occult or hidden only because they didn't have a word to refer to it. It was hidden in the sense that the temple orders of the ancient world were gone, the priests of the ancient world were gone. All that we had left were some threads. And these threads were fascinating. And what were they? And so the Renaissance thinkers called them hidden or secret or occult. They didn't mean it in a negative way. And then, like as would happen in the ancient world, kind of played out again in the Renaissance. At a certain point, there was a church backlash against them studying this other form of spirituality. And again, it became reassociated with the idea that it was something dark, it was something evil, and that pretty much remained in the Western mind. So even today, you have a lot of people who are studying the same things that I study, and they don't like to use the word occult. I use the word because I think it has historical integrity, and I don't think that it was never intended to communicate something sinister. And so my feeling is I don't want to just give up the word. I don't want to just let go of the word. And that's true of other terms too. I mean, you used the term ESP earlier, which is a term that I use. That was a term popularized by a great researcher named J.B. Rhine, who was active in this country throughout much of the 20th century. I use terms like ESP, occult, New Age, not in a negative way, but in a positive way, because I think they all have meaning. And I just don't want to cede terms like that to the critics. I think they're useful. I think they have integrity. To me, New Age means therapeutic spirituality. If somebody wants to call me New Age, that's fine with me. I don't believe in running away from these terms.
When you have some people that they run away from certain terms, you bring up the word Ouija board in any conversation.
Yeah.
And you have people look, oh, no, right?
For real, yeah.
Why is it that the Ouija board has such a lasting part of the supernatural history? Why is it?
That has been wild. It's so funny. The Ouija board is probably the one object that survives from 19th century spiritualism, the movement that involves seances and talking to the dead. And you can buy it shrink-wrapped on the shelf of a toy store today. Mm-hmm. This thing was being used in seance parlors in the 1880s. Those are some of the earliest references we have to the Ouija board. They called it the alphabet board back then. And then some toy manufacturers, novelty manufacturers in Baltimore, they patented the thing. I'm not sure that ever should have been allowed because it was really this folk device. It was something people would just make at home. Americans have a do-it-yourself attitude, and that extended to talking to the dead. They said, well, gee, maybe we can get rid of the medium. Maybe we don't need any middleman or go-between. We'll just do it ourselves. So you have some folks apparently in Ohio who created the first Ouija boards. Again, they called them alphabet boards or talking boards at the time. And then a novelty manufacturer, conglomerate of novelty manufacturers in Baltimore, patented the thing in 1891. They called it Ouija, and it just became a sensation. And the weird thing about the Ouija board is, and I used to marvel over this when I was a kid, here's this thing today in the 21st century that it's sold and marketed as a toy. It has a barcode on it, a price. It's shrink-wrapped. How could this have any occult properties whatsoever? It goes against all expectation. And yet there's this just unremitting stream of stories, really frightening, weird stories that come out of people's use of the Ouija board. I personally have never had I've had some scary experiences in connection with it. I haven't tempted fate too much. I don't make a habit of using it, but the number of scary stories that I've heard around it is just extraordinary. And it goes against all reason because you're thinking, this is just a toy with a barcode on it. How can there be anything weird going on here? But the mythology around it is incredible.
Well, you look at a cell phone, it's got all these colors on it and these buttons. It's just a cell phone. But
Yeah.
the fact is that by dialing it in, using it, you communicate with somebody. And it's kind of like, the Ouija board. I mean, I grew up.
It's exactly like it. Yeah.
Mitch, I grew up with the Ouija board in my house. We had multiple Ouija boards over a period of time. And my mom grew up with it. And when we started having paranormal experiences in the house, she's like, well, let's get a Ouija board, find out who these ghosts are, why they're here. And that became the go-to phone, so to speak, when anything would happen. We'd go there and find out who was it, what was it. And I used to sit there during the daytime, sometime at nighttime, and after school my friends would come over and we would play the Ouija board.
Yeah.
Does this girl like me? Does this girl, this and that? And, most of the time you're going to get stuff that it's lying to you. But the thing is, for me growing up, is it worked all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, it would fly across the board, and it was are you pushing it? We knew nobody was pushing it because we would ask certain questions about somebody else, and it would tell us the answer. We would write down words, and it would tell us what's written down. So it became a sense of that we trusted and we knew. But the funny thing, and I think you'll get a kick out of this, is I always thought for many years that the person I was talking to was named Ouija.
Oh, no kidding. It's interesting what you said about a Ouija board sort of being like a cell phone. It's absolutely a great comparison. It's like our social media. It's like email. This is a weird thing that happened to me years ago. When I first began researching Ouija boards, I started walking around and thinking to myself, well, gee, if I'm researching it, maybe I should be using one myself. Maybe I should be experimenting with it. And I didn't talk to anybody about this. I didn't tell any friends. I didn't tell my wife. I didn't write about it. It was just something I was walking around thinking about. Maybe I should be using the Ouija board as part of my research. Out of the clear blue one day, this goes back about 12 years, I get an email from somebody I don't know saying, I get the impression that you're walking around thinking about whether you should be using a Ouija board, and I want to urge you not to. And it was weird, because I hadn't spoken to a soul about it or even alluded to it. And so I had some correspondence with this person, and then after a while, the correspondence started to get kind of angry and weird and was going on at great length, and I said, you know what, I need to cut off this relationship. And I thought, wow, how much like the Ouija board is that? It's the same thing in effect. You've got somebody contacting me from out there in the world, anonymous, has my email address. We're talking. First it's helpful, then it starts to get a little strange, and I start to think, I'm paddling into waters I don't really like here, and so I cut it off. When you're using something like the Ouija board, you don't have any idea what you're opening the door to, who you're communicating with, what's going on. And let's even say the skeptics are correct, that, it's just from somebody's unconscious, they're making the pointer move. All right, let's grant that for a moment. Then what is going on in our unconscious? Because people are having all these weird, frightening encounters where they're getting threatened and scary things are happening. So if you say it's just coming out of somebody's subconscious, well, what is my neighbor Mike thinking if this is what's happening when I'm using the Ouija board with him? So no matter how you look at it, there is something unsettling going on.
It was pretty. Well, I'll just say this: it was just widely accepted in my house. Because we did it so consistently. My relatives, when they would come into town, we'd do it. When my mom was a flight attendant for TWA and she'd have layovers, some of the other flight attendants would be staying there. We'd break out the Ouija board, and I have to tell you, and I have to tell you that sometimes my grandfather, who was very Christian, would leave and he would go upstairs, and my grandma would sit there and she would talk to some of her relatives. But some of the flight attendants, they would have these terrifying things occur. Well, to them it was terrifying. I would sit in. I said, okay, Ouija board, spirits, will you turn the light off in the kitchen? All of a sudden the light goes off in the kitchen. There's nobody else in the kitchen.
Wild.
We had a plant that would sway back and forth. Then the microwave started going real quickly, the numbers on it, which is impossible because nobody's touching it.
Right.
And, they would freak out. They would end up running out of the room, the flight attendants, these adults. So to me it was like, it had a huge impact. And then when you have a TV guide go flying across the room by itself, almost bird-like, animation-like, you have drapes that start to flow back and forth by themselves, no windows. You hear moans in the house. And then you have the levitation. The levitation that occurred to me when I was a child doing the board. I started to levitate 3 feet off the couch cube that I was sitting on. when you have these things happen, you realize that you're tapping into another form of energy that is not easily accessible.
Yeah. Interesting.
And this fascination, obviously, goes back many centuries. You go back to Plato and Socrates, and you talk about, is there life after death? But it really kind of took off in modern day in our civilization around the spiritualist movement, which happened around the 1800s. Can you talk about that?
Sure. In the mid-19th century, first of all, various forms of spiritualism or talking to the dead, as you alluded, has been going on throughout human history. But it became very popular in the United States. In 1848, there were two adolescent girls, the Fox sisters, living outside the city of Rochester in central New York State, and they told their parents that the raps and noises heard throughout the cabin were spirit raps. And very, very quickly, these girls became all the rage among journalists, scientists, and judges and other people who came to examine them. And a very large fraction of Americans became interested in talking to the dead. And that was the birth of modern spiritualism. And I often tell people, if you look at history, it is the first spiritual movement, the first religion, in effect, that America exported to other countries, because it was only after the experience of the Fox sisters that seances and spirit raps and various forms of talking to the dead became popular in Europe, in the salons of Paris and London and elsewhere. So, in effect, the spiritualist movement was America's first great spiritual export. And it grew up in this country hand in hand actually with the women's rights movement. And a lot of people don't understand this. The fact is, most of the first spirit mediums were women. And it became the first time in our country that women who wanted a voice in the civic and religious culture could find it by sitting as mediums at the seance table. Now, the other night in her acceptance speech of the Democratic nomination, Hillary Clinton mentioned the Women's Rights Conference at Seneca Falls and how she was going to carry forth those principles. Well, the fact is the Seneca Falls Women's Rights Conference happened pretty much down the road in central New York State from where the Fox sisters lived the same year, 1848, and a lot of the early women's rights activists, voting rights activists in this country had spent time at the seance table, knew something about the spiritualist movement because it was a movement that attracted women who wanted a voice. Our view of a medium, including from the 19th century, is very often as a female figure, and that's correct. And this carved out an opening for women to become religious leaders of a sort for the first time in American history. And in fact, central New York State was the birthplace of so much. You had new religions like Mormonism and Seventh-day Adventism that came out of there, the women's rights movements, various utopian experiments, spiritualism, all kinds of experiments in mind power metaphysics. It was a hotbed of spiritualist and metaphysical activity. And if you drive through central New York State today, much of it is actually well preserved. A lot of it is beautiful farmland. You'd wonder, why was all this going on here? It was absolutely incredible. And one of the aspects of our history that we're only coming to understand today is that the spiritualist movement and the women's rights movement grew up hand in hand, absolutely hand in hand. So very often you'll find where there's some sort of occult or mystical activity, it's accompanied by some sort of social openings or changes.
You look at the seances that occurred, and there was a lot of fraud, and there was the fake photographs, but yet there was, and you have to sift through all that because you can't put it all in a box and say it was all fake, and it wasn't, because there was legitimate stuff that was going on, which, you had Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who investigated, was fascinated by this stuff. He was a believer in these types of things. And unfortunately, he got caught up in some of the fraud at some times because he wanted to believe so much. And then you had his friend Houdini. Houdini just wanted to expose everybody because, in a way, there was a personal, egotistical thing going on with Houdini as well. Of course, he cared about people getting taken advantage of, but in the same sense, people weren't showing up to his shows anymore. He wasn't filling the house like he used to, and he was trying to find out, why isn't people showing up like they used to? I'm doing some different things. I'm doing more incredible things. Well, they're all going to a seance down the street, or they're going to do this. And he'd be like, what? So he'd go investigate this, and his first inclination was, this is fraud. There's no way. This is wrong. And he was angry about it. So he chose to attack that type of movement and speak
Right.
up against it. And, there's other people that could talk more about that, but it was interesting how you had these two individuals that why they were friends. One believed in it, another one didn't.
Yes.
And they would investigate these things. And of course, today there's a show. I've only watched one episode, but there's a show on TV now where a fiction show where they go and they investigate these paranormal things. But that's a part of Occult America. That's part of the things that are going on in the movements. What have you seen since the 1900s? Over the last 100 years to where we are today. Is there any type of movement going on? Where do you see it going in the future?
Well, I think something that's going on right now is we're seeing an explosion in channeling. We used to call channeling, channelers used to call themselves mediums, or sometimes they'll refer to themselves as psychics. But the term that's most often used today is channeling. It was a term popularized by a man named Edgar Cayce, who, of course, was a great medical clairvoyant who used to go into a trance state and diagnose and prescribe cures for people's diseases. He died in early 1945. It was a beautiful, remarkable figure, a Christian mystic, a fascinating man in many, many ways. But he was the one who first used the term channel in the sense that we use it today. And I think today in the 21st century, there's an explosion of channeling. I find that there are people from all around the country, from all different walks of life, who describe themselves as going into some sort of either a trance state or being completely conscious and feeling that there is some other voice or intelligence speaking through them. And sometimes these people will turn these channeled statements into books or into popular lectures online. They have whole circles that form around them. So in a certain sense, we're seeing a reappearance of the spiritualist era today in the form of the channeler. In the 19th century, it was people sitting with joined hands in a darkened room in a seance parlor. And today it's very often people renting a room at a Holiday Inn or a hotel somewhere, having a channeler come in and do private readings for them or give metaphysical lectures to a group of people. I think we're really seeing the rebirth of spiritualism in the channeling movement right now.
That's interesting. I'm very familiar with channeler. A lot of my listeners are aware of that. We discussed that in the past. But when we take a look at, I'm listening to everything you're saying from the beginning to the end here, and everything actually happens to be involved with consciousness. What is consciousness? How do we access that? When you have the spiritualist movement, they're trying to find truths. They're trying to find information that they don't feel they can access, they can't get. So they're reaching out to receive something. Channeling is allowing something to come through yourself. But then when you look at Occult America and you look at some of the political figures staying positive, having that connection, and then realizing the true potential that you have as a spiritual being in accessing this yourself.
Yes.
Now, and I've seen on your website, you talk about a little bit about the mind-body connection, especially regarding health. How is that important with people with a mind-body connection regarding your own health?
Well, we're seeing a wave of experiments today into the placebo effect that are unlike anything that people in past generations have seen. Researchers at universities have found that people are responding to placebo surgery, which is almost unbelievable. Physicians are creating like a benign incision in someone's knee, and instead of giving them knee surgery, they have told them in studies that they have been given knee surgery, and they have an equal recovery rate to the people who have actually been given the surgery, except they don't have to go through the physical therapy and everything that follows from having knee surgery, for example. But whatever, if they were having an arthritic problem, in the long term, they report similar relief to people who actually had authentic surgery. This shouldn't be happening. You have people reporting recovery in one experiment that was done at Harvard Medical School in late 2010, in which they were administered a transparent placebo. They were told that they were being given a sugar pill, in effect, and a large number of the subjects reported lasting relief, even though they were transparently given a sugar pill. Physicians have also found in studies that medications work better. They're found to work better if the physician has spoken in praise of the prescription before giving it to the patient. So an attitude of hopeful expectancy seems to actually improve the efficacy of the medication itself. We're seeing all kinds of things that the mind can do in terms of health, and that only scratches the surface, that reason tells us we shouldn't be seeing. So the question becomes, we don't fully understand what's going on here, what mechanisms are at work, but what circumstances can be created so that the individual can benefit from this. A lot of physicians, they don't like the idea of the placebo effect because there is some deception involved. You're telling someone you're doing surgery, you're not actually doing surgery. They have an ethical issue with that, and I understand that. So the question is, how, in a transparent, benevolent way, can we harness these circumstances, which seem basically to create a mood of hopeful expectancy, so that people can get better, or that people can at least achieve the most wellness that is possible to them? How can we harness this state of mind? That's what I'm primarily interested in today. How can we make it useful? That's where I want to see the positive thinking movement go.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and I'm glad to hear that. It's ironic. I've been dealing with a TBI, I had a traumatic brain injury from a car accident back in 2009.
Wow.
It's been very challenging and unsettling, but I try to stay positive. But there's days that it's hard to fight.
Of course.
And then there's the chronic neck pain, which has affected all forms of my lifestyle. I was very active, playing softball, football, kickboxing, jet skiing, everything. All that had to been given up. So it's difficult. But
yes,
in this, I have really started to venture more into consciousness and understanding consciousness. I've had out-of-body experiences. I've had more incredible connections with the afterlife because I realized that this is just a vehicle. This is a vessel.
Yes.
Last year, I had a connection that it stated to me, change your emotions, you will change reality. We're talking about law of attraction and secret and stuff, but we're talking about something different, is that people feel, well, just being positive is going to change reality. No, because not just that. As human beings, we are driven by what? Emotions.
Right on. Yeah.
Emotions is the expression of this physical body with our spirit and soul with one another. Everything is based on emotion. So
that's right.
Change your emotion first. Focus on the emotion. What that means is if you're not happy where you're at right now and you're feeling upset, you're angry, remove yourself from that location. Go somewhere else. Go do something immediately that puts you in a better light. Something you like to do. Go to a movie.
Yes.
Go somewhere that's going to change your mind, that's going to take your mind off stuff. And what that does automatically is it changes your emotion.
Yeah.
Now, focus and hold on to that emotion. And continue to always step away. Like I tell people, if you're in a fight and you're in an argument, stop. Don't feed it, because you're going to get, like energy, it's going to grow and grow, and it's going to turn into a huge level. Walk away, think about it, calm down. Your emotion now changes. Now readdress that later on.
Yes, right.
Now, you know of Anthony Robbins. I mean, Anthony Robbins is huge. He's met people all over the world. Some people accept him, some people don't. But we have to look at some of the lessons of the principle he discusses are amazing. And one of them, it just popped up last week, and I thought it was fascinating. And I put it on my Facebook, and I was like, all right, I'm going to try this. And I tried it, and I could not believe the difference it made my entire day. What he was stating was that every day when he gets up, he spends 10 minutes at the beginning of the day, before he does anything else, in expressing and giving gratitude. And gratitude goes back to the Romans when we talk about giving gratitude to certain things, is gratitude for the things you have. And he said he would take 3 things he has in his life that, he's very grateful for. And he would basically pray in this meditative state and would say, I'm grateful for this, this, and this. It could be, I'm grateful for my pets. I'm grateful for my wife, my husband, whatever it may be. I'm grateful for my health. Take 3 things that, no matter what, you are grateful for. And you are putting positive energy towards that to start your day. Now, there may be negative things going on in your life. Don't focus on those. Don't focus on the problem. Focus on the solution for that. But start off with this positive energy stating that I am so grateful for this. Yes. So now what happens is that you have that energy around you. Any problems that come your way, you are in a different emotional state, that you're grateful that those things don't affect you as much. But this is what happens. And this is amazing. I was reading an audio book. Ron Perlman talks about Easy Street. Ron Perlman played Hellboy. He was in Quest of Fire. He was in Sons of Anarchy. He talked about that also, this positive thing. And he believes in a higher power, that whenever something negative would happen, that's just an atrocity, like, oh my God, this is horrible. I lost this job or whatever. He would go out and celebrate what he does have. He'd go out and say, you know what? So I just lost everything that I could expect for the next 6 months or 2 years. I'm going to go out. I'm going to surround myself with a bunch of people, even strangers. I'm going to have a wonderful time. He buys them drinks. He goes out to a baseball game because he loves the baseball, and he just has an incredible time. And then what ended up happening is later that day or the next day, it reversed the negativity of what happened. He says, I'm not going to tell the universe. I'm going to control the universe. So the question is, who is in control? Is the universe in control, or the environment in control, or are you in control? You must always keep yourself in control. If you can't control what's going on around you, remove yourself from that environment. Remove yourself from that situation. Go do something positive and trick the environment and say, you know what? You're going to do this to me. I'm going to go have fun. I'm going to go turn it into a humorous situation. And watch what happens.
Yes. I think what you were describing before is a brilliant tutorial in how to use the power of positive thinking. We call it thinking, but the truth is it's emotions, as you were saying, and we mustn't conflate emotions with thought. It's the feeling at the back of what we do that really matters. And people will say, well, gee, how do I get myself into this exalted emotional state? And I think some of what you're saying represents some really, really good exercises. I would also say that in those moments just before you fall asleep at night and just when you're waking up in the morning, that is sometimes called the hypnagogic state. The hypnagogic state. That is a time of extreme suppleness and flexibility in your mind. That's a great time to practice affirmations and visualizations. It is a time when you can impress things upon your subconscious like no other time of day. And we all experience it twice a day, just before falling asleep at night, just waking up in the morning. The hypnagogic state. And that is almost prime time for reprogramming your mind, for using your thoughts, your emotions as one unified whole. Do your affirmations, do your prayers, do your visualizations at those times of day, and you're likely to get remarkable results.
Mitch, I'm actually writing this down at night and at rise. Program the mind. Reprogram it. With prayers and visualization of things that are positive, things that you're grateful for, and things that you want to accomplish.
Right on.
And if you don't have the answer for things, and this is like Napoleon Hill talks about, you don't have to have the answers. Then you ask the universe to show you the answers, to guide you towards those answers, and you're going to find solutions that begin to present themselves.
Yes, and I also this nighttime state is an ideal time for that. Whether you think of it in terms of a higher power or the universe or the subconscious, whatever language you want to use that's comfortable to you and your background, ask to be shown something greater than yourself, and you will find doors opening and roads and possibilities that you hadn't conceived of.
Mitch, that's fantastic. Now, you've got your books, Occult America, and you've got the new one that just came out, right? One Simple Idea.
In fact, the paperback just came out to One Simple Idea, and some of these exercises that we've been discussing are in there. I added new material to the paperback that's practical, that has techniques and methods that you can test out in your life.
That's fantastic. And you've got your website, MitchHorowitz.com.
Right.
And is there any other way you want to promote or talk about?
Oh, gosh. If people visit the website, they'll find links to all kinds of things. My books are available wherever you find books. And if you throw my name into Google, you'll find all kinds of things. I'm very easy to locate. Anybody who emails me, any of your listeners who email me, I will send them 2 free things, 2 cards that guide them through how to use effective affirmations and what I call the 30-day mental challenge, which is a positivity challenge that you take over the course of 30 days. Anybody who emails me, I will immediately send them that material.
Great. I'm writing this down, too. I want to make sure I put this in the posting with this podcast that people can reach you through that.
Yeah.
Now, I got to ask you this. Is there a horror movie you're looking forward to?
Oh, yeah. At the end of this year, there's a movie coming out called The Bye-Bye Man, which is based on a true story that was written by a friend of mine, Robert Schneck, and we were talking about Ouija boards. It's about a group of Wisconsin graduate students who, in the winter of 1990, were feeling bored, and they decided to allay their boredom using a Ouija board, and they came to believe that they had conjured up the entity of a psychic serial killer who was pursuing them and coming after them, and they had some unbelievably vivid and frightening stories that they shared with my friend. And lo and behold, the story was bought by the producer Harvey Weinstein and made into this movie, The Bye-Bye Man, and it is coming out in December. Promises to be frightening and weird, and it is based on some very true events that my friend wrote about.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, it's going to be a trip.
Well,
and his book, The Bye-Bye Man, is out now, actually.
Everybody look forward to that. I mean, I like a good supernatural thriller horror movie that is based on truth.
Yeah.
Rather than this crazy gore type, let's just be sadistic type thing that tends to come out. I can't get into that.
I'm not into the gore myself, right? Yeah, I agree.
But like the words you used, roots that is into something that has truth to it.
Yeah. This one is based on true events, and the people involved were very vivid and very straightforward about what happened to them. It was very creepy.
Yeah, I look forward to it. Well, listen, I want to thank you very much for being on Spirit Talk.
Thank you.
You're fantastic. And everybody,
appreciate it.
Go check out his book, Occult America, One Simple Idea, and his website, MitchHorowitz.com. And I'll have the link attached to this podcast as well. But once again, this is Chris Fleming and Mitch Horowitz on Spirit Talk. We'll see you next month. Thank you.